those thoughts can stick to you. And just they can be very hard to shake off. They nag, they just sit there, and when things go wrong, they just pop back up. And you start answering the question with, yes, I think they would be better off without me. But it's not true. But those things stick to us. So right now, we have a generation growing up that's in crisis. And it's a crisis of identity. And this nagging belief that I am not good enough. There is a young person in our life. We've known him since he was born. He's 14 years old now. And he's now changed his name to a girl's name. And he identifies now as female. Our society is struggling so much with identity because we've lost the knowledge of really who God is in the way that he wants us to know him. And Moses prayed, and he prayed this prayer. He says, teach me your ways that I may know you. And God replied, and he said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. There are 5 main Hebrew words in the Old Testament that we translate into English for rest. And one of them means to stop doing something. It's the word Shabbath. And if you were to cease doing what you were doing, you'd actually be having a Shabbath, which is where we get the name Sabbath from. And it's to cease doing what you're doing. But that's not the word that God uses when he says to Moses, and I will give you my rest. It's a very different Hebrew word. And in its context, this is what it means. I love this. Stay with me, right? This is what it means. Resting from sorrow. It's resting from negative emotional feelings of anxiety, of regret, of grief, of worry, of mental torment that you feel. It's resting from that. It's not expending any energy. And the focus of this word is on being refreshed as a result of it. Now, the Hebrew word Shabbath, it literally means stop doing things that you would be doing on other days of the week. Now, that's not the word we're talking about, but that's the word for rest that's then translated to Sabbath, and it's about a Sabbath rest. It's about one day in 7 having a rest. But the word that Moses hears from God, this is what it means. It means that this rest that God gives is available every day of every week. You don't have to stop life to experiencing this type of rest. And it's a rest from the sorrow of thinking, I am not enough. It's not expending our energy on the expectations of other people, of wondering who I am. It's living refreshed with this identity based in knowing God's ways and not just what God does. It's understanding his purpose for your life, and not just through what you do, but who you are with all your limitations. And all of this begins with a healthy discontent with knowing God just through what he does, through thinking, well, if I press this button on the microwave, I'll get this result from God. And the expectations that you think you want God to do for you. And this healthy discontent that I felt led to a day in my life when I grabbed my Bible, I jumped in my ute, and I drove up onto Mount Lookout, and I asked God this question. I can remember praying and just deciding I'm going to stay there until I hear stuff from God. And this was a question I asked God. Show me your ways. And I started reading Isaiah, and I got to Isaiah 49, and I couldn't put it down. Something in me came alive as I started to read these words, and it was answering the cry of my heart. Who am I, God? Who am I? This is where Isaiah 49 starts, the chapter. This is what it says. Before I was born, the Lord called me. From my birth, he made mention of my name, and it goes on. And it's become a life chapter to me. It's a place that I go back to again and again and again. And God has spoken to me out of it and showed me his ways and showed me who I am and what I'm called to do. And I can remember talking to my brother Ken one day, and I told him about the impact and the importance of this chapter on my life. And my brother Ken goes, wow, that's how God's spoken to me out of that same chapter. It's like a life chapter to me as well. And many years later, I was talking to my dad, and you guessed it. Dad said, that's been the chapter of my life that God spoke to me from a young age. I've carried this all my life. God works generationally. He works through families, but he works through individuals. And if you've never heard God speak to you directly, personally, he wants to. He wants to show you personally his ways. And if you want to understand me, I don't blame you if you don't want to, because we're all strange creatures, and I'm certainly one of those. But if you want to understand how I think and why I think the way I do and what I do and who I am, read Isaiah 49. The authority I believe God's given me when I pray for people that are stuck in darkness, that's where it comes from. And if you want to understand Redgum as a church, the way we operate, why we do what we do, read Isaiah 49. All my pain, all my regrets, all the years that I seemingly had achieved nothing in my life, it's all there in this chapter. And also in this chapter is the difference between God's will and God's ways. And God's talking about his people. He's talking about Christians. He's talking about leadership in churches. And he reveals his heart. And he says this in Isaiah 49. He says these words: he who has compassion on them will guide them. That's God's will. But God's ways are different. If you've been hurt and damaged in church life, it's possible that a pastor, a leader, someone in authority has not been treating you, has not been functioning from a place of compassion. Over the past few years, there's been some very high-profile church leaders, especially in America, that have lost their positions because they have been so harsh and abusive in their treatment of people. Here in Bairnsdale, I personally know Christians that are wonderful, beautiful, good people, but they've been hurt and damaged in this town by the actions of church leaders. And that should not happen. It's not God's will. His desire is that she who has compassion on them will guide them. That's God's heart. That's his will. But here's the tension. God allowed that person to lead that church in that season, knowing in advance the damage they would do. And if you only know God through what he does and what he says, and you don't understand his ways, that can leave you very confused as to why God would allow that to happen. It can leave you angry, and you can sort of pull back from God. You can even get to a place where you walk away from God if you've been hurt like that, walk away from his church. Now, this is where Isaiah 49 kicks in. Because back on that mountain, all those years ago, God was starting to teach me his ways. And God's way for me, personally, is to lead Redgum from two different directions, both at the same time. And I'm going to read what God spoke to me on that mountain out of Isaiah 49. And it was about God speaking over my life and what he was going to do through me. And it says this: before I was born, the Lord appointed me. He made me a servant to, and here it comes, right? Bring back his people, to bring back the scattered people of Israel. Another translation says, who commissioned me to bring back Israel to him. That's to bring back Christians that have been hurt and damaged in church life, that have been scattered, that no longer have a spiritual home, no longer have a place where they feel safe anymore, that are disconnected from a Christian community. And then God goes on to say in verse 6, he says, you will do more than restore the people of Israel to me. I will also make you a light to the Gentiles, and you will bring my salvation to the ends of the earth. And salvation in that verse means health and well-being. It's welfare, it's deliverance. It's the restoration of people that are hurting, that are far from God. Before I was born, God had a way to restore scattered Christians here in this community called Bairnsdale. And if you're watching online and you've been hurt in church life, God is wanting to restore you. And before any of that happened to a single person, God's ways was to set up a church that could be safe and healing. It doesn't mean everyone accesses it, but it's available. And God by His Spirit will draw people to be healed and set free here. But there's more than that. At the same time, God's calling us as a people to reach people that are far from God. And just as we started Redgum, the fires hit, devastating our community, especially in Sarsfield. And we are just a baby church, just getting going. But God's called us to minister welfare and help and support to people far from Him. And in the 18 months or so after fires hit, there was over $100,000 went through our hands directly to 120 families. We had a team working physically, supporting in all sorts of ways our community. Now, I know that church is like a dirty word to many people in our community, but it's not to 120 families that we help through that. And the ugly, horrible sin of sexual abuse that's taken place in God's church is a stain on His bride. And what men have tried to cover up, God will not. God's ways include using royal commissions by governments, even governments that are anti-God, to publicly expose these horrors. And I don't want you to miss this. God has done that even if His church's reputation has been destroyed. Because God is committed to exposing the wrong in His bride. And because God is willing to do that, you've got to understand why He would do it, because His ways will eventually lead to a day when Jesus will return, and Paul describes in Ephesians the bride is coming back for. And these are his words of what God's church will look like. Radiant, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. And we get to play a part in that. We really do. Now, right now, we cannot meet at the hub, because to be able to do that, we would have to exclude every single person that's not double vaccinated. And we're not prepared to do that, because that would add more division to a community that's already divided. That's not God's way. So watch this space. We don't have an answer yet of where we will meet, but God does. And there will come a time when we're going to look back at even today, and we're going to see how God's ways have led us to being able to be a church that Even if they've been hurt and damaged in the past, we're going to bring people far from God that are struggling to do life in their own strength, that don't have answers, that don't have hope. We're going to see them come alive and well-being come into them. And we're going to do it together. And we are flawed human beings. We're limited. But I'll tell you what, God's ways are to use weak human vessels to show how amazing God is. Let's pray. Thank you, God. I thank you that you take our limitations, you made us with limitations, our fragileness, and you take that and you show how amazing you are. And I pray this day that as we go deeper into knowing your ways, that we would discover that there are things that we can't fully understand, but your ways are higher than our ways. Your thoughts are very different to the way we think. And when we step into this place of knowing and getting to know your ways, that you reveal things that give us a rest from all the struggle of life, from the things that we can't understand. We can just rest in you, and I thank you for. So we're just going to sing this last song together.
I've got bulldog clips galore now.
Good on you. There, it's anchored to the spot. And then we're just going to pray. And I don't know everyone's story. Just for those that are here for the first time, just welcome. It's really great to have you with us. Even the good-looking blokes that Joe's dragged along with her. That's fantastic, Joe. And one bloke, not blokes. Yes, yes.
Good clarification.
Yeah. But I don't know your story, but God does. And I know that God has been preparing Nick's heart. And Nick came ready to pray for kids, for teenagers, but we're going to pray for anyone this morning. So in a moment when the song finishes, we're going to turn the cameras off and we're just going to minister to anyone that would like us to pray for them. So over to you, Amy.
Thanks. We're going to sing that song, Your Love Never Fails. Nothing can separate, even if I ran away. Your love never fails. I know I still make mistakes, but you have new mercy for me every day. Your love never fails. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. Open seas, 'cause your love never fails. Chasm was far too wide, I never thought I'd reach the other side. Your love never fails. You stay the same through the ages. Changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. Your love never fails.
Great stuff. Well, we'll see you guys next week. Those that want to come, be here. We've got a limit to 50 plus our team. And then next 2 weeks after that, we're going to be at Lucknow Hall. So there you go.
Have a great day.
Okay. So that...